Hello, I'm Callie from Coding with Callie, and I am building a website builder in public. I'm charting my progress, showing you some tips along I go, and explaining some of the decisions that I made. In today's video, we are going to talk about the add page functionality, which I think is pretty cool. But before we do, I want to show you how I set up my router. I have a multi-page React project thanks to React Router. I'm going to show you how it works. Let's take a look. So you'll see over here that I'm creating my project. This is my main.tsx file. In it, I have my router and then my routes. It might look a little bit confusing because for my routes, I only have one, but you'll see that's not true. I have my home page and I have an about page. I have multiple routes. I also have a wildcard page. So if I type in something random, then I load my wildcard page not found. So technically, I have multiple routes. How's that working? Let's dig in and take a look. If I go ahead and go to App, this is where you'll see some of the functionality. You'll see that I have a vertical stack, which is just saying that I have basically a div with flex, and then I set the orientation of the div to column. But I'm using Chakra UI and I can just use vertical stack, VStack. So it helps make my code a lot more readable because that part is abstracted. All right. And then in that stack, I have my header. I have my admin buttons. I have my dynamic routes, which is going to be the different pages. And then I have some hidden modals, which we'll see momentarily. That'll be like my login modal and my add page modal. And then I have my footer. And all of that makes up my website. In the dynamic routes, that is where we see all of our different pages. So I get my pages from my pages context, which all you need to know is that that comes from my pages provider. So a provider, when it wraps around your project, says that everything within that provider component has access to that context. So my pages, everything inside it has access, including my router. This is what allows me to update the pages and add and subtract pages, all without having to do a hard refresh of my page, because my router has access to the pages. You can see that what we're doing is we have our routes here, and all we're doing is mapping through our pages that we got from the database and creating a route with them. But we're not just creating one route. We're actually creating two routes if you're an admin. We're creating the end user one, which is just going to be this. And then we're also, if I'm signed in as an admin, which I am, we're creating the edit page route, which you can see I'm still working on. So that is how we set up our routes and how we get everything making sense. Now let's take a look at how we add routes to our router, or rather add pages. For that, we have an add page form. So that is one of our modals, if you remember. And if I click here on the plus button, it's going to open up an add page modal, which is just going to be a form. And there I can type in what I want my menu name to be, which will be up here. I can type in what I want the path to that page to be. And I can type in a heading, so something like contact page. Then all I need to do is submit the request. And you can see on my back end, it created my page, and then it got my page and it all of my updated pages and completed the request. After, when I click the submit button on the front end, I have a response action. And what does that mean? That means after I call the API, this is the action that I want to happen on response. What I want is I want to get that data, that response data, which is going to be my updated user and my updated pages and my path. And I want to update that page context. You remember that page context is set up all the way up here in the page provider. So all I'm doing is updating state, but at a high enough level that my router has access to it. And then I'm also setting my add page state to false, which all that is doing is it's toggling when I click this. It's saying add page is true, so show the modal. This add page is false, so hide the modal. Okay, now we can go and click on this contact page and we can see it, and eventually we'll be able to edit it. Let's take a deeper look into these forms and how they work. So if you're anything like me, you don't like making forms. I'm not a front-end dev. I like to have a front-end part of my project, but it's not my favorite part of coding. So I want to abstract as much as I can and not repeat myself as much as I can. So I came up with a form component that's super reusable. All I need to pass in is the initial values, the ability to set those initial values, and like overwrite them, the route that I am wanting to ping on submit, the action that I want taken after a response comes back, and the heading for my form. So all I need to do when I'm creating a new form is come up with these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 items, and that makes it pretty quick. What are the initial values? Well, the initial values are going to be the different input items on my form. So if you look here, we have 1, 2, 3 inputs on my form, and those correspond to my initial values. You'll see that for the initial state of my form, I want menu name to be an empty string, I want path to be an empty string, and I want heading to be an empty string. And I pass that in, my state, right, and the ability to set those, because when I start typing, that is, I want to handle the change. All right. That is going to set the initial values object with whatever I type in for that specific part input item. So here's my actual form, right? I'm looping through the keys of my initial values object, which if you remember were menu underscore name, path, and heading. And I'm creating an input item for each one of them. All right. And for that input, I'm handling the change with that handle change function. If you're wondering how I got that placeholder to be a capital M and not an underscore, I use a little helper function, format placeholder. I take the key, which would be menu underscore name, and then I replace the underscore with a space. So then now it's lowercase menu space name, and then I look at that first character of the key, and that would be M, and I make it to an uppercase, and then I take a slice of the rest of that string and add it to it. And then I return the key, and that's how we get these nice placeholders. In terms of the type of input, I have the key being dynamic based on if it's a password, then the input type is going to be password. Where do we see this? We see this with our login form. Here, if I log in, the username is text, but this, the key is password, so that's why you see the little dots happening there. And then the value is going to be whatever the value at each of those keys is. So when we look at what we passed in, they were blank strings, so that's why you didn't see anything here when I initially wrote it. Let me sign back in and show you what happens when you do pass in initial values. So if I go to the edit form and then I go to edit page details, you can see that home / and home page are automatically filled in. And that's because in that form, I pass initial values that actually have initial values. I hope that makes sense. All right, so my initial values, anytime I change something here, now this is going to overwrite the string and be put there. So when I actually send my form and I handle submit, all I need to do is send that initial values object with the route to the route and post them, and then it's going to magically create my data. And by magically, I don't mean magically, because we can take a look at the back end to see what's happening. But let's say magically for right now, and if it works out, yay, then we get a response. And if we get a response, then we're gonna do the response action on that response, which if you remember is updating the pages and flipping the toggle to close the add page modal. All right, let's take a look at the back end and what's happening when we make that post request to /pages with our menu name, path, and heading. So to that, we're going to go to our handlers, and we can see that when we hit the post pages endpoint, if we scroll all the way up, so post pages, if we hit that, we're going to call the create page handler. From there, it's going to get the request information and bind it. Okay, so it's going to get us a menu name, a path, and a heading. I'll need the user ID as well, because when I create a page, I need to have a user ID that creates it. So I'm going to get that from the context of the request. And how do I get it into the context of the request? From the middleware. If you'll look, you can see that I am going to extract information from the token and then set the ID within the claims. Well, here I'm not extracting it from the token. I'll do that with using the role. But what I'm actually doing is, where do I get that? So ID, set ID from claims.id. Oh, I just didn't create, I am taking it from the claims. What I should have done is probably, to make it more readable, is ID claims at ID float 64, and then I would do ID here. So see, that is the importance of making your code readable, so that way future you is not confused by the code you wrote. So I didn't follow the same pattern that I was following in the other part, and so then it confused me now. But basically, I'm getting it from my tokens, claims, and then I'm setting it on the context. And so then here, I'm getting it from the context. Okay? Then all I need to do is create the page by passing in the user ID, request menu name, request path, and request heading, and create the page in the page service. To do that, it's not difficult. It's a pretty simple request. So because I eventually want to be able to change the order that the pages appear in the menu, I have to get some more information. I have to get the highest page number and then add it right after. I log it, I insert it in the database, and I return nil because there's not going to be an error for this guy. And that, my friends, is how I'm adding a page to my website builder. I hope that helps. If it did, yay. If it didn't, write me a comment and let me know what I could have done better to explain this. Thanks for watching.